Hello, and welcome to Pedder Unplugged. I'm Tabatha Badger. We're finally back. After a few technical dramas, we bring you today's very special episode, the audio from the Pedder Pub Talk 2.0. Held at the Fern Tavern in late September, we joined for a few drinks and discussion about everything restoring Lake Pedder, from global rewilding, tourism, politics, to the aesthetics. The voices that you're going to hear in today's episode are, of course, Christine Milne, former Australian Greens leader and convener of the Lake Pedder Restoration Incorporation, and Professor Ben Richardson. Ben's traditionally a professor in law, but today he talks about aesthetics, and he poses the important question, should we restore Lake Pedder purely because we subjectively view the original lake as more beautiful than the present impoundment? How do we quantify beauty when it means something different to all of us? And finally, you're going to hear from myself. I just completed my master's thesis looking at tourism at Lake Pedder, present, past, and the potential future. We look at, are there ways to revive the present impoundment and increase visitation? Or is the best way forward simply restoring Lake Pedder? Of course, there's a live audience, so there's plenty of curly questions thrown in too. Now, I should mention, Ben is speaking to a slideshow, but he is such a professional that you can comprehend and visualize everything that he's talking about without having to have the slides in front of you. So please, enjoy this episode of Pedder Unplugged, the Pedder Pub Talk 2.0.
Welcome everybody. I'd first like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Aboriginal land, the land of the Milne people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And it of course is one of the great strengths of a restoration movement is that we can not only restore the land, but we can restore a good connection with Tasmania's First People and actually involve and work with them as we restore Lake Pedder. So that is a real benefit, or quite a social benefit, quite apart from the ecological benefit. I'm so pleased that we've got this opportunity to talk about the restoration of Pedder, because it becomes even more important and more relevant as we see the ecological degradation of the planet and the intensifying climate crisis. And the political response to that is coming up with the Glasgow Conference of the Parties, the 26th Conference of the Parties shortly, and also the Biodiversity Convention Conference of the Parties. And the wonderful thing that has happened in the last 12 months particularly is a coming together and a recognising that whilst renewable energy is really important in transitioning away from fossil fuels, and we have to do it, we must not do it at the expense of biodiversity. And this is really important because in the last few years, renewable energy has been largely hijacked by big corporations which see it as the next iteration of major profits, economic growth, GDP, all that we know. And they don't care actually in many cases on what the impact on biodiversity is. So the politics have come together at the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature conference, which just finished in Marseille a week or so ago. They brought out the Marseille Manifesto. And I just want to read you a sentence from it, because it does make very clear the fact that the world is making a strong statement, and hopefully this will be transferred across into the COP. So I'll just read to you. The Marseille Manifesto says the climate and biodiversity emergencies are not distinct, but two aspects of one crisis. Unsustainable human activity continues to compound the situation and threatens not only our own survival, but the foundation of life on Earth. We cannot separate ourselves from nature. We are a part of nature and depend upon it for our lives and livelihoods. Our response to these emergencies must be mutually reinforcing. For example, measures designed to address climate change must not lead to further biodiversity loss. Absolutely clear. So when we have all of the proposals for a mega expansion of renewable energy at the cost of biodiversity, as is the case with the proposed wind farm at Robbins Island, for example, as we will see with the whole Marinus Battery of the Nation proposal, we are talking about renewable energy at the expense of biodiversity, and so we have to actually have the bigger conversation about consumerism and growth. And so some of that we might be able to explore tonight. Now, to talk about his long-term passion about restoring Pedder, we are really lucky tonight to have Professor Ben Richardson with us. He has been a long-time supporter and wrote a brilliant article right back, I think, in 2014 on the restoration of Lake Pedder. Ben is a Professor of Law at UTAS and also at IMAS, works with IMAS in that capacity, but has spent decades overseas at universities in New Zealand, in Canada, UK, I think. Yes, UK as well. So I'm really delighted that Ben is putting his mind and considerable expertise to the question of the restoration of Lake Pedder and has come out so strongly in support of it. So I would ask you all to welcome Professor Ben Richardson.
Thank you for those gracious remarks, Christine. So I took the opportunity to ask my students a little quiz. And the question I asked them is, which is the prettiest? To look at different pictures of the original Lake Pedder and the new Pedder and tell me which they preferred. It's a small sample, but the result is that 80% preferred what was there originally. Not slam dunk, but pretty good. The more difficult question I asked them is why? Why did they favour the original Pedder? And that was a very difficult question for them to answer, and the kind of answers that they gave tended to be without reference to reasons of beauty. For example, they talked about the scientific values, the ecological, the biological significance. They really struggled to understand what it means to defend a proposition that something is beautiful. There was one student, though, impressed me with an answer that I thought grasped the core of what it is to think about with aesthetics. And I'll tell you at the end of my presentation what her answer was. Next slide, please. So the idea that we should appeal to beauty as a reason to conserve and now to restore Pedder is not old news. I think Strauchanus, who was at the forefront of trying to conserve Pedder, wrote this statement shortly before his death and shortly before the drowning of Pedder. Just take a moment to read it. You can't read it at the back. Is there any reason why, given enlightened leadership, the idea of beauty could not become an accepted goal of national policy? If we could accept the role of a steward and depart from the role of the conqueror, if we could accept the view that man and nature are inseparable, parts of the unified whole, that a Tasmania that is truly our world can be a shining beacon in a dull, uniform and largely artificial world. Since Pedder was flooded, others have begged to differ. In 1973, the Hydroelectric Commission issued some Christmas postcards. Next slide, please. In which it tried to portray before and after images of the Lake Pedder, with the implication being that the new Pedder is more attractive. In fact, it's a con job. It doesn't show the original site of Lake Pedder, it shows an area nearby, the Serpentine Valley. Next slide, please. If we go forward to recent times, I looked at a few websites of some of the eco-tourist enterprises that are making money out of the new Lake Pedder. Tassie Bound, Pedder Wilderness Lodge, Wild Pedder. There's a consistent narrative here which is about come and explore this pristine, unadulterated, beautiful wilderness. So what we've got here is an alternative perspective that the new Pedder can be just as attractive or beautiful as the old Pedder. And that creates a challenge, because if we're going to argue forcefully, persuasively and effectively for the restoration of Pedder, we've got to be able to come up with clear reasons why the old Pedder is more attractive than the new Pedder. Now, the idea that people could recreate artificial lakes and so on that might have beauty, of course, is not confined to Lake Pedder. Next slide, please. The best example in Australia is Lake Griffith, in my opinion, in Canberra. It flooded the Milne River in 1964. You can see the before and after images of what it was and what it is today. I lived in Canberra for a couple of years. I'm fairly sure that most Canberrans today would staunchly defend this image as more attractive. So it's a difficult area that we need to try to think about, how we try to differentiate between different versions of beauty and how we could defend the version that we want to see Lake Pedder restored. But what I want to do now is to go through some of the challenges that I think we're going to need to address in building that case for the beauty of the original Pedder and how we might overcome these challenges. There's 4 things in particular that we need to be attentive to. Next. Oh, there's an example of environmentalists appealing to natural beauty as well, the Wilderness Society. This was the poster that was put out in the national newspapers of the federal election of 1983, telling us, would you vote for a party that would destroy this? So nature has been at the forefront of appeals to beauty, and it informs a whole lot of other things about our lives. We adorn our bodies with fashionable clothing. In our leisure time, we visit nice art galleries like Milne, T-Mag. The corporate sector is fascinated by beauty. That's why it spends millions of dollars on advertising, product logos, packaging, because it knows that it influences consumer behaviour. So there's no doubt that aesthetics and beauty is very important, but it can lead us astray. So let's go to the next slide. The scarlet sunset of photochemical pollution with these luminous, vivid colours might look very attractive, but it has no correlation with ecological health. Let's have a look at another slide. The ubiquitous suburban lawn and the golf course. This is something we're more likely to encounter in Tasmania. They're very attractive, some people think, as a way to decorate their houses and the places they recreate in, but they're a biological desert. So the very first thing that I want to put on the table for you is that beauty can be deceptive as a guide for what is attractive and worth conserving in nature. Next slide. One of the problems when we appeal to natural beauty, the sublime, the superlative, the fantastic, the spectacular, is that we risk creating a dichotomy between 2 versions of beauty. That which is truly very special, Fresno Peninsula, the White Glass Bay, and then another kind of beauty that's in fact aesthetically mundane by comparison. It's dull, it's boring. For example, the glass plains of southwest Tasmania might be a way to contrast it. So the problem is this: in arguing for the restoration of Pedder, we need to be careful that we don't create a hierarchy in which there's another kind of environment that is demoted and receives less amount of protection. Now, I know that that's not what people arguing for the restoration of Pedder want, but it's something just to be careful about. Next slide. This is from 1971, a whole lot of flights that took off from Hobart Airport and were landing around on the beach of the original Lake Pedder. The message that I'm trying to convey here is this: that which we find attractive in nature is also something that we may end up damaging. The history of exploitation of nature's beauty through furs, tusks, horns, feathers, precious gemstones is something you'll all be familiar with. And today the main thread of loving nature is ecotourism. We've seen the controversy over Lake Malbina. Similarly, in wanting to restore Pedder and get people to engage with it aesthetically, we don't want to create the risk of damaging and destroying the very thing that we wish to protect. And I know that Tabatha is going to talk fairly shortly about how we can have ecotourism in Lake Pedder without ending up with things that we don't want. Next slide. This is from 2015 when the Chinese president and his wife visited Tasmania and cuddled the Tasmanian devil. What I'm trying to get at here is there's a perception out there that beauty is simply that of the eye of the beholder, that it's subjective, that it's changing, and that it's trivial. Why the Tasmanian devil? Well, historically, it was the very name devil captures what I'm getting at. It was not considered attractive. It was considered ugly, revolting, to be persecuted. And then in 2015, it became the Tasmanian official animal emblem. the same year that the Chinese president visited and had a cuddle with the Tasmanian devil. So the point is this, that when we appeal to natural beauty, we risk encountering scepticism from those who don't regard it as particularly objective, substantive, enduring value, but rather it's changeable, it's trivial. Let me talk about now some ways forward to try to think about how we can build a stronger, more persuasive case for protecting Pedder. No. It's like revealing a joke. So the first thing that's, I think, one of the foundations on building a really healthy and sound appreciation of natural beauty takes me to the work of the American philosopher Arnold Berliand. And he argues that we need to move away from being a detached spectator to being an active participant in the aesthetics of the places that we wish to admire. What he means by this is that we need to engage emotionally with the natural environment, and that means entering it. It's the difference between admiring a beautiful old growth tree in the Tarkine and giving it a hug. It's that emotional engagement, the multi-sensory, the sound, the sight, the smell, the touch, that is the basis of developing really authentic, deep aesthetic connections with the natural environment. And so what would the implications of that insight be when we think about the restoration of Pedder? For me, when we restore Pedder, and it will be restored, I think it's really important that people in the community be part of that restoration, that they're there on the site. It's not just a job for experts to do, but involves ordinary people out there, because it's going to take a number of years to do it. It's not just a matter of draining the water, but it's that opportunity to actually experience, touch, feel, be part of that place, to start to cultivate that aesthetic appreciation. There's another way in which we can think about how we might appreciate the natural environment for its beauty, and that takes us to the work of a Canadian philosopher, Alan Carlson. He's very different to Arnold Berliand. He says, no, we don't look at emotional ways to engage with aesthetics. We think with our head. It's a cognitive, scientific approach. And Carlson argued that the way we can appreciate best natural beauty is when we come with that informed by the natural sciences, with a knowledge of botany, zoology, ecology, and so on. Because what those disciplines do is engage us in the appropriate aesthetic elements or features that are important. And it reminds me of what my students said at the beginning of that quiz. A number of them referred to the scientific values as the way to substantiate their aesthetic appreciation. Now, how do we fit that with what Arnold Berliand says in Restoring Pedder? I think one clue to it is this. Different segments of the Tasmanian population will engage aesthetically in a different way. If they are young children who are not going to have knowledge of natural sciences, that very emotional connection I think is going to be so important in developing the aesthetic appreciation. But for others, I think the scientific approach is going to be very important. And what it really means is that scientists are those concerned with beauty that have to have a conversation. They can't be in separate silos. We need to work together in curating the aesthetic appreciation of Pedder, bringing those two groups together. And then the third and final thing that I think is important in how we can cultivate a really healthy aesthetic appreciation of Pedder is to look at the role of artists, because artists can help us tap into the absent aesthetics of the world that we don't see. Next slide. So this is a wonderful book, Jellyfish: A Natural History by Dr. Lisa Ann Gershwin, who's a marine biologist. It just happens to be over there. And it's full of amazing, beautiful photographs of jellyfish. Now, who would have thought jellyfish are attractive and beautiful? They're gorgeous, get the book. The point that I'm trying to make here is that this provides a portal into a world that we can't see. And when we restore Pedder, there's going to be a part of Pedder that you won't see as a bushwalker, which is what's in the water. And we need to make sure that the aesthetics, the beauty of what's in that marine environment, well, it's a freshwater environment here, is going to be brought. There are no jellyfish in, Lisa, stop taking a photograph. There are no jellyfish in Lake Pedder, would there be?
It's just a really good background, you know? Actually, there are jellyfish in Lake Pedder. I'm really sorry, but there are. They're an introduced species of freshwater jellyfish. But anyway.
We'll come to that in Q&A. Well, maybe in another edition of Lisa Ann's book, there could be a section on the jellyfish of Pedder. The point is, we need artists. We need artists to engage us in the aesthetics of the world that we can't see, touch, hear. And so they're the three pillars that I think are really important that provide a basis in that moving forward with Pedder. And I want to finish up with the question that I posed at the beginning, which was to the students about why they would appreciate the original Pedder to the new Pedder. And the student who answered it best, she said, it's because it's a more complex, intricate, diverse kind of environment. And particularly, she said, the new Pedder is like an overfilled bathtub. Now, let me explain what the scientists would interpret that as. A number of evolutionary psychologists like J. Appleton, Dennis Dutton, Stephen Davies, have shown through cross-cultural studies around the world that there is hardwired into Homo sapiens an aesthetic appreciation for environments that resemble the ancestral environments in which we evolved as a species in East Africa. Next slide, which is my last one. This is a painting by an 18th century English landscape architecture, Humphrey Rimpton, which has been cited by evolutionary psychologists as the type of environment that people are most drawn to. What's in it? It's this varied environment where there's a water feature, there are trees, there are cleared areas, it's this mosaic of complexity. And the original Pedder is closer to this than the new Pedder, which is the overfilled bathtub. And so I think the student answered very well in thinking why there should be an appreciation for one version of Pedder than the other. Sorry that that's a bit rushed. There's a lot more I could say, but I've been given my time and I'm happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
Perception. I'd like to now introduce Tabatha Badger. She is our campaign coordinator, and you will have met her in that capacity many times, a small business person and a person who's walked many kilometres of tracks in Tasmania and knows the Tasmanian environment very well. One of the issues which has come up with the restoration of Pedder, and Ben alluded to it a minute ago, is people sometimes say to us, look, we actually don't support the restoration of Pedder because at least it is safe under the water as it is. If you are successful in restoring it, then every big capitalist under the sun will want to build a resort on the beach, and we'll be up for a whole lot more campaigns to try and stop the wreckage of Lake Pedder. And so that got us thinking about how we respond to that. And of course, being in a World Heritage Area is important in that regard because it already has a degree of protection. But as a result, Tabatha enrolled to do a Masters at Tas Uni in this whole area of what does restorative tourism look like as opposed to exploitative tourism. So I'm very pleased to introduce Tabatha, who not only is committed to this campaign as the project officer for it, but also is actually putting herself in the position of actually being challenged with these ideas about what restorative tourism might look like. So please welcome Tabatha.
Thank you, Christine. And actually, it's really interesting that you mentioned the beach before, because one of the primary arguments behind retaining the present lake is that there are actually beaches there at the present, very different beaches and aesthetically on an entirely different level. But it's just interesting that that you did bring that up because it is used against it quite a lot. But we'll get to that a little bit later. And in looking at regenerative or restorative tourism, something changed significantly in the process of this study that impacted the rest of the tourism industry, and that was COVID. And that brought it to a standstill. But as we'll discuss, that's probably the best possible scenario that could ever have happened to the globe for the sake of Lake Pedder. So when we're talking about tourism, we're also not just talking about an industry. This is not just about huts and boardwalks in the wilderness. This is about a social system that we can use to bring cohesion. It's about a full destination branding, not just about visiting one individual place. So it goes beyond just the visitor numbers at a single destination when you're considering about how that place is presented. So to determine how a restored Pedder might look from a tourism and a branding sense, we had to first evaluate what the value is of the past Lake Pedder, the original Lake Pedder, the present Pedder impoundment, to then look at what the future could be. And this is really focusing on the knowns, what we could absolutely predict because as COVID and undoubtedly climate change will show us, we don't know what the future's going to be to determine exactly what should happen with Lake Pedder, and it is going to be a lengthy process to restore it. So we've first started with the original Lake Pedder. Visitors obviously came from plane and by foot. Those visitor statistics we don't know what they are, and it was so long ago that often these stories are accentuated and romanticised, and you can have anywhere between 9,000 people a year and 29,000 people a year who might have visited the beach. So we don't know exactly how many people went there, but the one thing that is certain is the principal asset of the original Lake Pedder was its wilderness. And in the late 1960s, when the Gordon River Road was constructed and access became a lot easier for people, that sense of wilderness was diminished. And it was when the announcement of the flooding of Lake Pedder came about that the original beach suffered what today we would call over-tourism, when perhaps too many people were there, it was too crowded, and the solitude and wild atmosphere was diminished just to more of a party or Byron Bay sort of atmosphere. And that's when tracks were formed. For example, over the Coronets wasn't actually a set formed track, it was just something that was a quick access from the Gordon River Road that people could get in and out of Pedder quite comfortably within a day. But the biggest thing to come out of assessing the original Lake Pedder is its social values, that despite its isolation, that initially, when it was declared a national park in 1955, it was a 3 to 5 day walk from anywhere else. But still, the community, despite its inaccessibility, fought for it to be declared a national park because they recognised how significant it actually was. So then we have so a very, very early sketch map before the road was built, when there wasn't any zoning in the area because it was yet to be World Heritage Area. Next slide. So the present Lake Pedder, the 242 square kilometre impoundment, there's just one large justification, particularly from the Scenic Preservation Board, which was the predecessor to the Parks and Wildlife Service, was that this new lake was going to be far more accessible to more people. It was going to be just as beautiful because it still had the reflections of the mountains on a still day. There's a legislated drawdown on the lake to retain its natural look, despite the fact that it isn't. And that was one of the reasons that in 2016, when that legislation could have been changed to provide power to us when Basslink went down, that they didn't draw down on Lake Pedder because they needed to retain what they declared a very important tourism asset. And obviously now it's part of the World Heritage Area, so there are management guidelines and lots of zoning around this. So we're quite lucky that most of the area around Lake Pedder that is in green is declared wilderness. There can't be any kind of development there. You can't just put a hotel there or anything around the side of the lodge. You can see where Lake Pedder is in the middle, and the rest of the impoundment is declared recreation for boating and trout fishing. So in 1993, 5.2% of the visitors to Tasmania went to Lake Pedder. The last available statistic recently is in 2016. Only 1.6% of the state's visitors went to Lake Pedder. Arguably, that is one of the peak times of tourism in the state prior to COVID and prior to the massive bushfires. Yet Lake Pedder, or the impounded Pedder, actually went down in visitation numbers compared to everywhere else in the rest of the state. Even the walking track at Mount Anne and the Western Arthurs increased in tourism, yet the accessible new Lake Pedder did not. And also in terms of the trout fishery, in 1993 it was at its peak. There was still massive trout being caught there. It was a huge thing for that industry. But by 2019, the Derwent Valley had an assets assessment of their tourism assets, which included the impounded Pedder in a trout fishing sense. And they declared it redundant because it is so overpopulated now that the ecosystem is no longer suitable for trout to thrive in it. So in terms of what the present Pedder impoundment means for contemporary Tasmania, not a lot. So then you move into the future. Anything could happen in terms of draining Lake Pedder. A lot of it's going to come down to the management of how it's actually done at the day. We don't have control over that. But what we can say is if Lake Pedder was drained tomorrow, what would we do? people are going to want to go there. They need some kind of access. They're obviously not going to be allowed into the area that's rehabilitating straight away. The primary operative is to give the environment a chance to recover, otherwise there's no point in going through with the project at all. So the closest thing you can do is on the Coronets Range is to reopen that original track. It's declared wilderness, but it is already partially degraded. You can still see the track today if you Google map it that was originally formed. Having a track there and having a lookout so that you can actually see the original Lake Pedder as the water goes down allows everyone that opportunity that can get up there to do so. That also means increased traffic. Somewhere you're going to need a car park. Luckily, where that car park is, just where McFarlane Pass is there, the yellow and pink area is all hydro zoned, so you can actually build a car park there. And the really good thing is there's a heap of dams that need to be taken down to restore Lake Pedder, and all of them have construction material in them. Now, because Lake Pedder and the Pedder Impoundment is part of the TWA, you're actually not allowed to take any kind of gravel or anything into the area. So traditionally you wouldn't be able to build a car park, but luckily the dams are already inside the World Heritage Area, so you can recycle all of the material and build your necessary infrastructure there. Everything's set up ready to go. And it's a single entry exit point. So there's no further degradation, you have a set area. And also, really conveniently, there's a set time that people are comfortable sitting on a shuttle bus for that can have interpretation. And Strathgordon is exactly 20 minutes away, and 20 minutes is the optimum time for people to be able to sit on a shuttle bus and enjoy a ride and take in the interpretational material. This also leads to further zoning. Obviously, once the impoundment is drained, there is a lot of area that needs zoning. In 1995, as a part of the federal inquiry, Jeff Mosley did a study on this and assessed 5 different scenarios. And at the end of the day, in order to retain the initial social values of Lake Pedder and its wilderness qualities, it was to zone the rest of it except the beach wilderness and have the beach zoned as recreation so that when it is safe and when the area has safely rehabilitated, people could go to the beach. Ideally, again, it's that same single entry track from the Coronets that could lead people down there. And this is where everything is intertwined with preventing over-tourism. We have a great opportunity now. This is a new destination, and we have a new kind of marketing that is about to emerge from tourism because we are about to recover from COVID. The World Tourism Organisation identified very early on in the COVID piece that coming out of this, international travellers would have a much greener conscience. They're going to want to go to destinations that are taking care of the planet because we have just suffered a pandemic from biodiversity loss and we know that we're in a climate crisis. If they are going to invest their money in a world of travel which is much more difficult than what we saw pre-2020, they're going to make sure they're going to somewhere that shows good custodianship for their land. And this is proven. New Zealand have started actively investing in degrowing their tourism industry. A lot of places as a tourist you will now have to make a pledge to vow to look after any of the land that you look on. So it's absolutely timely that Tasmania can restore Lake Pedder, and it has a perfect opportunity to tell tourists how to interact with that landscape, that they are witnessing something very special, but also something incredibly sensitive, and that they do have to look after the place where they are. This does mean a walking track. Only so many people can go on a walking track. No, not everyone can go there. Not everyone can go down the Franklin River either. And much of our nature-based tourism and the appeal of ecotourism for Tasmania came from the Franklin River. Just the premise of actually having that free wild place is enough to draw visitation to the state. Even if they don't visit it, they might just hang out in Hobart, but they feel that they're somewhere really special and somewhere that cares about its environment. They can look at Canunny and see the wild places just their doorstep. And the same goes for Lake Pedder. Just the premise of restoring that lake and being part of that movement in the globe of regenerative tourism, restorative tourism, is going to bring people here. And that's incredibly significant at the moment because the Tasmanian brand is tarnished. And we have an opportunity at the moment to completely change the global perspective of who Tasmania is as a destination, to be environmentally responsible and to lead the way in restoration. Yes, undoubtedly someone will want to build a lodge on the beach at some point. And no, there's not necessarily a way to stop that without going down there and protesting. There are a few things that we can do in terms of maintaining that single entry track. you could say reopen the Huon Plains track, but we don't know with climate change and when Pedder is drained exactly how that area is going to revegetate. You can't assume that all the streams are going to be in the same place, that all of the button grass fields will regrow in the exact same place. So until that area is safe for visitation, it's impossible to predict exactly where you should put new walking tracks. And the other thing is for a dark sky park. There's a huge opportunity in the southwest to monitor light pollution from Hobart, which is increasing with the urban sprawl. And with that comes a monitoring system that you wouldn't be able to have a massive 2-storey lodge on the beach, because it would then affect the values of that dark sky park. So yeah, I don't know about everyone else in the room, but I'd much rather be defending a lodge on the beach of an actual Lake Pedder and reaping those biodiversity rewards in a climate crisis than not having Lake Pedder back at all. So, thank you.
That was episode 4 of Pedder Unplugged. Don't forget to share the podcast, rate it, refer a friend. As always, if you'd like to learn more, head to lakepedder.org. Or if you have any questions about any of the topics raised in the Pedder Pub Talk 2.0, throw us an email, lakepedder.org@gmail.com. I'm Tabatha Badger, and thanks for listening.